Hello and thank you for listening to the Travis Talks Education Podcast. I am your host, Travis Smith, and today's episode is all about the NCAA Academic Revenue Distribution. Going to give you a breakdown of what the revenue distribution is, why it was created, what the requirements are, pros and cons, and then my solution for using the money. So today's episode is brought to you by AdvisEdu. AdvisEdu is a think tank company I created recently focusing on how innovation in higher education impacts NCAA academic policy, as well as how membership institutions can fairly be monitored and assessed academically to ensure all student athletes are getting a quality educational experience. AdvisEdu looks to stay ahead of the game by participating in the overall innovation discussion in higher education, as well as representing the voice and opinion of the NCAA membership institutions in many different channels of communication. AdvisEdu produces white papers on various topics that impact intercollegiate athletics both today and tomorrow. To learn more about the topics or the projects that I'm working on with AdvisEdu, go to advisedu.com. That's AdvisEdu.com. Okay, so today's episode, like I mentioned, is all about the academic revenue distribution. Now, what exactly is the academic revenue distribution? Well, it's essentially what higher education has already been using, and over 30 states use it, is performance-based funding in higher education. Your funding, or at least a portion of it, is tied to mainly a few things, such as degree completion, at-risk degree completion, and then on-time graduation. So if you think about the NCAA, for example, degree completion, graduation requirements, and then at-risk degree completion. That can be the same thing, but for minority student athletes or the revenue sports, so football, men's basketball, and then on-time graduation. So the NCAA obviously has the 40, 60, 80 rule, the PTD percentages. So those types of factors are going into this method. And performance funding, as I mentioned, nothing new, but this is another example of the NCAA is trying to form more into an education entity, and they oversee a lot of institutions. So they're starting to act like it as far as what the state and government does with higher education in general. So we see this with graduation rates and retention, on-time graduation being a priority now. Now let's tie some money to it, right? So higher education funding, been around a long time. For example, the state of Indiana has been doing it for 15 years now. Did a lot of research on this, and it just seems so familiar to the NCAA Academic Revenue Distribution. I remember when I worked at Indiana State, having a meeting where all the academic advisors from all across the campus were involved, and we were using a degree software, and a big part of that was let's do plans so they keep students on track. And the reason why is because every student now we're getting money for that. So we're being tied to kind of fulfilling the promise. And, recently with the Rice Commission, I know it's not the official name, but the Rice Commission coming out talking about degree completion and needing to be a priority of NCAA, I think this performance-based funding kind of masked as the NCAA Academic Revenue Distribution is going to put some more incentives in there. Now, will some game the system or not? Not sure, but you can't make a policy against all the bad actors. You got to think smart about it. So there's some critics out here, which I'm going to talk about, that really is talking bad about the academic revenue distribution, which kind of blows my mind. But we're going to get to that. But before I go any further, just kind of want to give you an idea what the requirements are. And then I'll talk a little bit more about, the plans that came out, why this happened, and then the process part. And then as well as what I think can be good for it and what is bad right now. Nothing's going to be perfect at the beginning, but going to kind of give you my opinion on that. So first off, this new distribution is coming from the annual increases in the future years of the NCAA's media rights agreement. So the March Madness multimedia right with CBS and Turner Broadcasting, that is obviously what's been kind of driving a lot of the money revenue coming in for the NCAA. It's been criticized by some, but what's not being talked about is the amount of money that is going to pour back into these institutions and hopefully go towards academics. Now, keep in mind the criteria that I'm about to mention is for all the sports as a total. So every school's counting as one. This isn't going to be broken down by sport. I talked in the last episode that every school or every team at a school has an APR, and they obviously have their own academic requirements for eligibility. This is just saying, all 24 sports is actually one team. Okay, so there's 3 requirements. All an institution has to do is meet one of the 3, and they get their pie, I guess you see, their piece of the pie in the revenue. So the first requirement, Division I APR, academic progress rate, we talked about it last episode, for the previous year is equal to or greater than a 985. The average of a single year scores for all teams is used. So I mentioned there's a couple of ways that the APR factors your score, access to championships. But for here, the average of single year scores for all the teams is used. So there's no 2-year rate in all teams included. Must be a 985. That's actually a pretty high score. 930 is that minimum that solidifies a 50%, predicts a 50% graduation rate. So 985 is pretty high. Requirement number 2, the GSR, graduation success rate. Also talked about that last episode. For the most recently available year for all teams is equal to or greater than 90%. Now keep in mind, this is a 6-year process. So next year's is going to include the 2012-2013 GSR data. So the graduation success rate, often criticized because the federal graduation rate is what all institutions use, right? So guess what criteria number 3 is? So criteria number 3 is the difference between the student athlete in the student body percentage in the most recently published FGR, so federally graduation rate, is equal to or greater than 13 percentage points. So an institution just has to meet one of those 3. So once again, Division I APR must be a 985 single year score. The GSR must be greater than 90%. And then 3, the difference between the student athlete and the student body percentage in FGR is equal to or greater than 13 percentage points. Okay, so how many of those schools would actually have met that? So they did a study last year, because all this information, obviously we have it every year. Anyone can see it actually through the searchable databases that are linked up on my website, AdvisEdu.com, if you want to see those. But 66% predicted of the Division I membership would have actually gotten their piece of the pie by meeting one of those 3 requirements. And not only the 66% is impressive, but in the last 5 years, 90% of Division I membership schools would have met one of those 3 requirements. The good thing about this, what it's telling you is more people are going to get the money, right? So right now, it's kind of at an advantage based on how the academic revenue distribution is going to change things. Is right now, most of the revenue distribution from the NCAA is based on athletics. That can be said as good or bad with the NCAA. But 27 non-autonomy conferences, so take out the Power 5, they're going to have more access to money based on the academic revenue distribution. Because if you don't have that many schools in your conference competing in, say, March Madness, then you're at a big disadvantage. And if you look at the field, a lot of the schools that keep winning games are going to be in the Power 5. So this puts it on your own school to earn the points. So maybe you're not going to get through the tournament. Maybe you think the tournament's biased towards Power 5. I'm not here to debate that part of it, but what I am going to say is this academic revenue distribution is going to be a big game changer for these institutions to get more money. So how did it all get started? So from reading and doing some research about this, it looks like discussed in 2015 at a D1 summit, selected leaders such as presidents and chancellors, athletic directors, conference commissioners, they started talking about discussion of D1 priorities, so either now or in the future. And this clearly came up. There's a lot of attention drawn towards the NCAA and Division I big-time athletics. Do they care about academics? I think this was a big stake in the ground of saying yes. But it was more than just a PR stunt. This is a great way to give the money back. This is going to change thousands of lives and going to help institutions be able to provide that academic support to be kind of more competitive on a recruiting edge too, of saying, we have this academic support. We can hire another academic advisor. We can have an academic center for student athletes. We can pay for summer school. So there's a lot of great things that's going to come about this. So timeline and distribution. So overall Division I academic-related distributions will change from 8.3% of overall distribution in 2015-16. This is going to take it to 21.5% in 2031-32. So while it's just now starting, where I'm trying to take this part of it is this money is going to keep growing, right? So as the media rights grows, a big chunk comes out of that for the academics. So just to give you an idea of what type of money we're talking about, okay? So the size of the academic distribution, the NCAA put together a chart and with some projections. Now this is assuming that 228 schools is approximately 66% of D1 membership. This is assuming that it stays steady with that 66%. So right now, these numbers in each year is what each institution annually would get for meeting one of those three requirements. This is why it's a game changer, folks. It gets bigger every year. Now, starting in 2019-20 academic year, whenever it's first sent out, 55,000 roughly, but then it goes up 2020-21, goes up to 111,000. Next year, 159,000, then 222,000, then 288,000. Then the big jump goes from 2023-24, then jumps to 2024-25. It almost doubles. So it goes up from 288 to 462,000. Then it kind of stays, the tilt is over there. It starts to steady out. But you're looking at then about 474,000, 487,000, 499,000, 541,000, 541,000, 557, and then it drops back down in 2031-32 to 541. So that's assuming that it stays around 66%. Now they're about to release the newer projections from this past year as far as last school year's data collection to see how many schools would still have met that. But that shows you what the game changer is, right? So if you're a low resource institution and in 2024-25, all of a sudden you meet those requirements and you get $462,000 for meeting those requirements, think what your institution can do with that money. So I think this can be good because it can lead to maybe right now schools need to start thinking about, we need to invest up front in academic support services, recruiting the right students and putting some stipulations on coaches, because all of a sudden that money, it's growing every year, right? So you need to start getting ahead of it now, putting a plan in place. How can these schools get this money? It's no different than an institutional leaders worrying about retention and graduation rates. Now, all of a sudden, athletic directors and presidents are going to have to start doing that because this can make more institutions self-sufficient with their athletic program and paying for scholarships, paying for those the academic support service. That can lead to things. So I'm interested to see if schools are going to invest now up front to get that money, or if they're just going to, assume do things as usual. My guess is once that money starts getting, $250,000, $500,000, they're going to have to be investing more in the front end instead of just hoping that they meet that number. So right now, everyone's worried about that 930 APR score. It needs to go up because, you're looking at your team is 985. So then it comes into, are schools going to game the system because so much money's on the line? Dr. David Ridpath, he talked about academic revenue distribution in a piece of his. He wrote, I quote, "Why would an academic incentive be a bad thing? To me, it's very simple. First, academic integrity, persistence, satisfactory progress, and GPA are something we are supposed to provide for in higher education already. It does not need to be incentivized, just as winning does not need to be prioritized in a nonprofit, educationally based environment." Here's my response, though. The academic incentive is already in higher education. So, like I mentioned, institutional leaders are already facing these things, and they're getting rewarded by the state because graduation is important. So anything you can do to push towards graduation. Now, is there going to be bad actors? I mean, right now we have, obviously, academic misconduct is on the rise, or at least it's talked about more now. I'm not sure it's necessarily on the rise. But yes, we have to get in front of that because online education is becoming a real thing, and it's a scary thing for athletic departments and colleges to monitor for not necessarily their students, but you don't want the black eye that comes with an NCAA violation. So yes, there might be some bad parts about it, but if we're going to say that it's not part of higher education, but it already is. So I mean, you can't govern against bad actors. You have to have incentives in there, keep in line with higher education. So I'm not going to criticize the NCAA for giving money away for academic requirements that are actually pretty steep requirements. I mean, if it's an institution based, then I don't think 66% of the four-year colleges would actually meet these requirements, but they're not insurmountable. I mean, you can get these, but I don't think it's right to criticize the NCAA for doing it. Now, I don't love everything about the NCAA Academic Revenue Distribution, how it's set up as far as the process goes. For example, I, for one, would like to know where the money's going and making sure it's going towards academics. So if you're going to reward it based on academic achievement, I think that money should probably go back towards academics. And I'm not saying that most won't, but right now, the way the process is, there's no stipulation that that money has to be spent in any particular way. So you could put it down against your debt, or you could be using it to give bonuses on academics to your coaches' salaries, whatever facility expenses. What I'd like to see is if this money is academically motivated and the NCAA wants to reward schools for academic achievement, I don't see why you wouldn't put that there's some academic stipulation in there. So I think that's something that is actually probably going to get changed because I just from talking to people and doing a little research for my book, I do get the perception that this is not liked, and I think a lot of people dislike it because they think that people use it poorly. I mean, higher education in general doesn't do a great job of spending money. Athletics in Division I is obviously used to that criticism as well, rightfully so, when you look at some of these facilities and a lot of debt. So I would just like to see it be tied to the academics. Another thing is, this one's probably a little harder to do because I know logistic-wise, I would like in a perfect world just distribute it directly to the institutions. Right now, an easier way for that would just be don't tell a conference that, if you have a revenue share agreement that you can just wrap this into it, because I think that schools should be rewarded that actually accomplish this. I don't know about you, but if I'm an athletic director or president of a school in, say, the Big Ten, Big Ten's probably a bad example, so let's say Missouri Valley, where that money is going to go a long way, but, two of your schools decided either to not make academics a commitment or a priority, or they decide to recruit students that weren't prepared for their institution, and just so they can get that competitive edge of, we don't care about that, we just want to win, but they still get all that money. So you're going to say, here's $450,000 for academic requirements that you didn't meet. Spend this money however you want, and then all of a sudden the recruiting budgets go up at that institution because they're not putting that money towards academics. That would make me upset and concerned. So what I would like to say is only the schools in the conference that actually met the requirements get that money. That would shore up a lot of problems as far as making sure that academic priority is for everyone. So you should only get that money if you earned it. I don't think that's too far out of line. So those are the two things. For one, we don't have a stipulation on where the money can be spent and how it can be spent. And then we also don't tell conferences who you can and cannot give the money to. I don't know. Those are two areas that I'd like to see. And the other thing is this money can be used for a lot of great things. Some ideas, for one, summer school funding for students that want to graduate early. Now, it'll be interesting with if you don't want your students to graduate early so that they transfer as a grad transfer, then maybe you won't do that. But there's a couple projects I'm working on with AdvisEdu that I really think that this money is going to be the source. So income share agreements, for example, is becoming a big thing known mainly at Purdue University. It's called Back-A Boiler. Too early to really see where it's going, but I read a great, the Entangled group had a great white paper on income share agreements as a way for financial aid to try and keep loans out of the equation, private loans. So for me, this would be a source, the academic revenue distribution that maybe whether it's the NCAA or the conferences can use, even if they use that money kind of to jumpstart an income share agreement for a special fund for athletes to return and finish their degrees, such as the Rice Commission talking about. Now I know we don't want necessarily to use as an income share agreement because it's not necessarily a scholarship. But for those partial scholarship student athletes, that is a area of my concern is our funding for partial scholarship athletes and what their loans are. So a lot of times those students are actually not getting a very big athletic scholarship, and instead they might be traveling across state lines because they really wanted to compete for this school, but they're out of state. So they're paying out of state tuition, they're getting a small scholarship, and they're taking out loans. So if we could set up through the academic revenue distribution, whether it's income share agreements, so it wouldn't be the form of a scholarship, but we could say, hey, you know what? We don't want you to take out these horrible private loans. So instead, we're going to dip into an income share agreement from your from the Missouri Valley, just using them as an example again. And then all of a sudden, the income share agreement, it's tied towards 6 months post-employment or post-graduation. If you have a job, you get a piece of that, but it's capped. It's a lot better than loans. So that could be a source. Another thing is, in the Rice Commission talking about D1, if you're the commitment to degree completion. So I think that degree completion in general could be pulled from that. So saying, you have to use some of this money towards your own institution or your conference degree completion fund, and then setting stipulations on how to get in that. And you can't spend that money. It's there for students that want to come back and finish. So there's just a lot of things. Obviously, the adequate spending on academic support is the biggest one. But as we go through, now that I've given you kind of baseline knowledge of the rules, the academic revenue distribution, I'm going to start getting into the innovation topics of higher education, and you'll see that it's going to take money. With money comes opportunity, right? So if you're going to fund things, there's a lot better ways that institutions can get better and produce more graduates. And then even things like Career Center, because the whole purpose of college is, or one of the big purposes of college is to leave with a job in line, or at least have those skills. So there's more projects where I'm going to use the academic revenue distribution, but today's episode just really wanted to give you the breakdown. So it's not the perfect solution right now, but it's a start. And anyone that criticizes it, I think they're out of line because, like I said, 30 plus states are using performance-based funding education, and it's very much similar to the NCAA academic revenue. I just think, especially once the money gets up, schools are going to have to start thinking about investing on the front end to get rewarded on the back end, but we have to make sure they spend that money correctly and appropriately based on academics. So that's all I have about the academic revenue distribution. And to wrap things up, just going to talk to you about AdvisEdu. So my think tank company, AdvisEdu.com. Learn more about it. It's AdvisEdu.com. And if you're a potential client, AdvisEdu really works with NCAA membership institutions and athletic conferences in 3 specific areas. 1, plan and implement innovative projects focused on academic and higher education topics. 2, explain the what, why, and how behind NCAA academic rules and measurements to faculty, staff, and students. And then 3, provide reassurance of eligibility by conducting independent NCAA continuing eligibility audits. So if you find yourself asking whether your institution or conference is thinking about the feasibility of a project, what should we do with that NCAA academic revenue distribution money? In need of a crash course in why the NCAA Academics is indeed an academic entity? Maybe you have some faculty that think otherwise. I can help kind of bridge that gap between your athletic department and your institution as far as what role you and the NCAA plays in higher education. Or you need an independent audit of your NCAA continuing eligibility. So I don't want to have to worry about eligibility is a thing I get told quite a bit. So then AdvisEdu is perfect for you. So go on the website, AdvisEdu.com, reach out on the contact page, and let's at least talk and see if there's any way to help you out. And then if you're more interested in just keeping up to date with the topics or the projects I'm working on through AdvisEdu, you can go on there and look at those as well. And then obviously the table of contents, as I mentioned in the last episode, of the book I'm writing called Two Sides, Same Coin, a reminder that higher education and the NCAA are on the same page. That information's on there too if you're interested in reading about the book. And then you can also find every podcast episode as well as the baseline information I shared last episode about academic rules, the academic measurements, anything like that. Go to the website. It's a central hub for kind of the design think tank of what the NCAA's impact is going to be with higher education innovation. Okay, so thank you again for listening, and that's all I've got. And be sure to rate the podcast, listen to all the episodes. Going to be posting about 20-minute episodes quite frequently now. You can always keep the conversation going on Twitter by following me at Travis Higher Ed.